I've stood in a campaign office the morning after a win. If you ever have, you'll know the picture. Pizza boxes, donut boxes on every flat surface, empty bottles. There's a flatness in the air, stale food, and that particular smell a room takes on after a lot of people have worked hard in it for a long time. The signs are already coming down off the walls, right? Somebody's coiling the cable in the corner. The whole place has that look of a thing that's finished. It's done. And it is finished. The race, of course. To everyone moving through that room, the volunteers, the reporters, you, me, the contest ended sometime around midnight, assuming it wasn't a tight race. But every so often, you catch the winner standing in the middle of it, and they don't look like someone who just won. They look like someone with a long road still ahead of them. The signs are coming down, the party's breaking up. So why does the person who just won look like the hard part is still in front of them? Well, because for them it is. There's a thing nobody tells you before you run for office. Winning the next election begins the day after you win this one. The campaign doesn't end. It never really ends. It changes venue. It moves out of the church basements and off the doorsteps into the office they just won. And it runs quietly every single day they hold that seat. Now, let's move ahead a year, maybe three, and you have got a meeting with that same person, with that candidate who now holds public office. And you're good at your job, so you've done the work, the brief, the data, the one pager that holds up under hopefully a hard read. And you walk in, you make your case. The elected official on the other side nods in the right places. It's a warm meeting. Everyone's engaged. They seem genuinely with you. And then as you walk out, you realize that nothing's really going to move. And you replay it on the commute home. The argument was sound. The elected official, the politician seemed charmed. So what the heck happened? Well, while you were walking them through the evidence, they were running a different kind of arithmetic. Not, is this true? Not, is this good policy? The question underneath that whole meeting, the one they might not say out loud, even to themselves, was colder and simpler than that. Does this help me or hurt me with the people who can take this seat away? You thought you were in a policy meeting, but you were in a campaign, the one that's been running since the morning after they first won, and you walked into the middle of it carrying a memo. I spent a few years on that side of the table as a senior political staffer, so I'll say it pretty plainly, none of this is cynicism. When an official sorts you into help or hurt columns, they're managing the one risk they can actually control. Scandal, they can't do too much about, obviously depending on the type of scandal. Getting redrawn out of their own district, they can't do much about that either. But being seen to have lost touch with the people who put them there, that one they can absolutely prevent. So they spend the whole term preventing it against an opponent who, at a lot of the time, doesn't even have a name yet. And if you come up in public affairs without ever running a political campaign of your own or having worked on a political campaign of your own, it's easy to keep bringing the better argument to a contest the better argument doesn't actually decide. The book that we're getting into today was written for people who want to run for office. Read it from where we sit, though, and it is the source code for the person across the desk. Learn the campaign that put them in the chair and the one that they're running right now, and you can stop bringing a memo to a campaign. Welcome to Masters in Public Affairs. I'm Joseph Lavoie. This time, the book that we are looking at is Running for Office by Ronald Faucheux. The full title is Running for Office, the Strategies, Techniques, and Messages Modern Political Candidates Need to Win Elections. A bit of a mouthful, but this is a great book. It came out in 2002. Now, 2002, some of the machinery in this book is a period piece, but its underlying lessons hold up a quarter century later, because here's the thing about where this book sits and what we're doing here. So for a long stretch of this series, we've worked on theory, right? We started Masters in Public Affairs with Walter Lippmann, and we talked about the pictures in voters' heads. We spent some time with Cialdini on two different books talking about triggers. We spent some time with Rees and Trout on the mind of the prospect. Big thinkers working at the level of ideas, and we've spent episode after episode pulling the durable concepts out of them. Now, lately, what you might have seen is I've been starting to turn, at least for the next little while, towards field manuals, and I'm doing so on purpose. Last time out, in the last episode, if you didn't catch it, was Chris Rose on how to win campaigns, which was a practical book by a practical operator. And today, we're spending time with Faucheux. And there's a deliberate move on my part here because once you spent enough time on why people believe what they believe, you start wanting to know what you actually do to put what you learn into practice. The theory reveals a terrain, yes, but the field manual tells you how to walk it. And that's what I'm interested in doing with this episode, with this book, and with a few that will follow. So, Faucheux is about as pure a field manual as we're going to get in this canon. Machinery and drills written by a working consultant for people about to do one of the most exposing things you can do in public life, which is, of course, to put your own name on a ballot and ask strangers to vote for you. So, why are we, public affairs people, most of us not running for public office, reading a candidate's handbook? Well, because I don't think you're fully ready for this work if you've never run a campaign, if you've never worked on a political campaign. So much of what we do, the targeting, the message discipline, the mobilization, was born inside political campaigns. We borrowed so much of it in the development of the public affairs sphere and our sector and our way of doing work. Some of us are using these tools without ever really having spent time with the source code. And spending time with this book is a little bit like spending time with the source code. It's the closest thing to running a campaign without ever running one. You'll recall our episode with Joseph Napolitan. He gave us what I would more describe as an operator's memoir, whereas Faucheux gives us the architecture. I'll ask you for some patience on this episode. Even though this is probably one of the shorter books we've covered in the canon, it's going to be one of the longer episodes. We're going to spend a good while talking about candidates and elections and what looks on its face like pure electoral politics. But stay with me through it because the translation to our work is the whole point here, and it only works if we let the campaign material breathe first. All right. Let's get into it. Why this book exists. So Ronald Faucheux ran the trade magazine of the political consulting business. It's called Campaigns and Elections. It's a publication that I turned to as a go-to resource early in my career when it was still a print magazine. And so what we have with this author here is someone who wasn't an academic looking in from the outside. He had run himself. He had put his own name on a ballot. He had helped others run as well. And in other words, what we have is a practitioner working this craft when the craft was changing fast, even before the social media and digital boom of campaigns. So here's the change he's responding to. There's this stretch of period. You can roughly date it to the 1980s into the 1990s, where political campaigning stops being what it looked like during Joseph Napolitan's era. It's the era when information got cheap and fast. You could pull your opponent's voting record, their old statements, their contradictions, and you could do it quickly. The media market fractured, and out of that, the political consultants landed on an idea that reorganized the whole business and the whole way of doing campaigns. They called it message politics. The idea underneath it is pretty simple. When a voter votes, they're not grading you. They're choosing between you and whoever else is on the ballot that day for that office. And if it's a choice, then what matters isn't how good you are in the abstract. What matters is how you're different from the other name. The contrast. That's the thing that moves a vote. Once the whole field accepted that campaigns are won on contrast, a lot of what we now think of as modern politics just follows. The going negative, the opposition research, the relentless comparison. None of that is an accident of bad character. It's what you get when your entire profession agrees that the voting decision is a choice, and a choice runs on difference. It runs on contrast. So that's the world Faucheux is writing into, a world where campaigning has professionalized, where there's now a craft with methods that you can be good at or you can be bad at. And here's a problem he's actually solving, the reason why the book exists in my view. The craft professionalized, but plenty of the people stepping up to run for office didn't really get the memo. They still were showing up, running on instinct, on ego, the old faith that being right is enough, and then they would lose to someone who treated this craft as a discipline and prepared accordingly. There's a moment in the book that I came back to, I circled a couple times, especially in light of the episode we did on good strategy, bad strategy, which you can find in the feed. Faucheux describes one of the legends of the business, a consultant named Matt Reese, getting frustrated that nobody could actually define the word strategy. Everybody used it. Nobody could say what it was. So Reese gathers a crew of campaign veterans at his place for a couple days. They're playing poker, gumbo, chomping on cigars for the express purpose of pinning the word down. And somebody offers up the easy out, the line people always reach for. Strategy is like pornography. You can't define it, but you know it when you see it. And that's not good enough for Reese. His point being, if you can't define the thing, how can you possibly do it on purpose? That's the whole book right there, I think. That's the method. Take the amorphous stuff, the instinct, the feel, the thing that the natural campaigners just seem to have, and name it in parts. Turn it into something you can teach and check and run deliberately instead of hoping it shows up. And the word Faucheux comes back to more than any other isn't strategy or message or money. It's preparation. His line is that modern politics demands preparation above all else. And that is what this book is all about. The professional isn't the one with the best instincts. The professional is the one who did the work before the contest started. The parallels are there for us. I'd argue our field has been through the same shift. Public affairs professionalized. We built the targeting, the message discipline, the mobilization machinery, and a lot of it we lifted straight from the political arena. But we borrowed the tools faster than we understood them in some cases. And you can hold every one of those tools and still walk into the room running on the old faith, the better brief, the cleaner argument, or the belief that being right is what carries the day. It isn't. It never was for the candidates. It isn't for us. The ones who win prepared for the contest, and the ones who lost just showed up to it, right? So let me try to put the whole episode into one sentence, the way we always do here on Masters in Public Affairs, the core idea. And here it is. The elected official you're trying to move is a candidate. Not was a candidate, is one right now, today, and will be every day until they leave that seat. And once you see them that way, everything about how you deal with them changes. We have a habit in public affairs of thinking about elected officials in two phases. There's the campaign, the loud, public, messy fight to get the job. And then there's the governing, the serious part, where they're in office, weighing policy, and where we come in with our briefs and our evidence and our reasonable asks. Two different modes, campaign mode, then governing mode. Faucheux's book quietly demolishes that wall. There's a whole chapter near the end called Re-election Tips for Legislators. And the first line of the thinking is that winning the next election begins the day after you win the last one. The campaign doesn't pause for governing. Governing is the campaign conducted by other means. Every vote they cast, every town hall they hold, every newsletter they send asking constituents what they think. That's not the off-season. That's the permanent campaign running underneath the governing the whole time. And Faucheux is blunt about what's actually in the candidate's head while all of this is happening. His line, and he means it as advice to the candidate, but read it as a window into the person across your table, is that the goal is to win the election. Not to indulge your ego, not to make people like you, not to get even with your enemies. Get more votes than the opposition. Nothing more, nothing less. Now, let's put that into perspective from our side of the desk. When you walk in with your ask, the elected official isn't running it through the filter you think they are. You think the question is something along the lines of, is this good policy or is this argument sound? The question they're actually running it through is the one we opened the episode with. Does this help me or hurt me with the people who take this seat away? And here's why that matters so much. If you believe they're in governing mode, weighing the merits, then your job is to have the best argument. Bring the cleanest brief, the strongest evidence, win on quality. But if they're in campaign mode permanently, then the best argument isn't what moves them. What moves them is whether your ask fits the campaign they're already running, whether it helps them with their voters, whether it protects them from the opponent who doesn't have a name yet. Those are completely different jobs. And most of the disappointment in this work, the warm meeting that goes nowhere, the champion who won't actually spend any political capital, the great points, let me think about it, that turns into silence, comes from doing the first job when the situation called for the second. I want to be careful here because this can tip into something a bit uglier than I mean. I'm not saying officials don't care about policy. The good ones care a great deal about policy. I'm not saying it's all cynical vote counting, but what I am saying is narrower and I think harder to argue with which is this. The policy and the politics are never separate in their heads. And if you bring them only policy, you've handed them half of what they need. The official who'd love to help you still has to be able to explain that help to the people who keep them in the job. Give them the merits and not the campaign, and you've left them to build that bridge alone. And a lot of the time, they just won't do it. So the reframe, the thing to carry out of this whole episode is this: stop preparing for a policy meeting. Start preparing for a campaign meeting. Same room, same official, completely different job. The rest of what we talk about today, the message box, the targeting, the database, all of it is really just the answer to one question. If the person across the table is always running a campaign, what does it actually take to be useful to it? So that's the question, right? If the person across the table is always running a campaign, what does it take to be useful to it? To answer that, you have to be able to see the campaign. And that's the problem. Most of the time we can't. We see the official, we see the office, the staff, the committee assignments. What we don't see is the machine underneath all of it, because it's mostly invisible from the outside and because nobody on the official side has any reason to show it to us. So let me pull the cover off. I want to walk through how the permanent campaign actually works mechanically. And then I want to start with the single most powerful tool that official has. Most people in our business have never really looked at it. It's, of course, the database. Not a glamorous answer, I know, but stay with me because this is the thing I find myself telling clients more than anything else, and it's the one often they're slowest to believe. Here's what Faucheux tells the incumbent to build the day after they win: a file of every registered voter in the district, and not just names, everything legally available: address, phone, email, party identification, age, which issues they care about, what groups they belong to, how politically active they are. And then the instruction is to keep enhancing it constantly with every new piece of information that comes in for the entire time you hold the seat. Because by the time the next election rolls around, that file is the most valuable thing you own. It's a direct line to every person who decides whether you keep your job. Let's pause on this for a moment. The official across your table may know, name by name, who in their district is with them, who is against them, and who hasn't made up their mind. You almost certainly don't know that about your own issue. They've been building that picture for years. You walked in this morning with an industry brief, maybe some polling, likely a list of supportive stakeholders, but that's not a list. And the database isn't also just a list. It's the foundation for the thing the elected official actually does with it, which is targeting. Faucheux describes it about as simply as it can be described. Imagine 3 boxes in the campaign office. One has a smiley face, one has a question mark, one has a frown. Every voter the campaign learns anything about gets sorted into one of the 3 boxes: supporters in the smiley box, opponents in the frown, everybody undecided in the question mark box. And from then on, every dollar and every hour gets spent according to which box you're in. Now, here's the part that catches some people off guard. The frown box, the people who oppose you, you spend nothing on them. Nothing. You don't try to win them over. You don't try to change their minds. You let them go. And the persuasion effort, all of it, goes to the question mark box. That's where minds are actually movable. But the piece I find genuinely counterintuitive is what Faucheux says about election day itself, about getting your own supporters to actually show up. You'd think you would pour your turnout effort into the strongest, most committed supporters. He says the opposite. Your hardcore supporters who always vote, leave them alone. They're going to vote no matter what. Spend your get out the vote muscle on the supporters who are with you but flaky, the ones who agree with you and then don't bother to show up. That's where the turnout effort earns its keep. Weird, right? You ignore your biggest fans and chase the lazy ones, but it's exactly right because the resource is finite and the enthusiastic voter was never the risk. That's the GOTV engine, the get out the vote engine. The database underneath, the sorting on top, the spending driven by the sort, and wrapped around all of it is a constant low-grade machine for 2 things at once: gathering more data and looking responsive while doing it. The newsletter that doesn't just tell constituents what their elected official thinks, but asks them what they think. That's not a courtesy. That's data collection dressed as humility, and it's brilliant. The town halls, the note that goes out to every new voter in the district every month, welcoming them onto the rolls. Every one of those is a feed into the file, and every one of those also signals, I'm still here, I'm still listening, I haven't lost touch. Because losing touch is the one risk the official can actually control, and this whole apparatus exists to prevent it. And there's a language to it too that tells you the official is always thinking about the voter and not the institution. Faucheux's line is that insiders think in terms of bills and resolutions and amendments. Voters think in terms of problems and solutions. The official who wants to keep the seat has to live in the second language, the voter's language, even while doing the first job. So hold on to that. It's going to come back when we go to how you actually talk to these people. So that's the machine. Let me apply this now to our own realities. When I tell a client that the most powerful thing an elected official has is a living file of their own voters, the natural next question is, so what does that have to do with me? Well, here's what. If you want to move that official, you're trying to move someone whose entire decision runs on what their voters think. And you have two ways to be useful to that. You can speak to their voters for them, show up with their own constituents already activated, already contacted that office, so that the official can see the support with their own eyes. Or you can fail to do that and bring them a brief instead and ask them to take your word for it that the public is on your side. One of those is bringing voters to the room. The other is bringing a memo. And the official has spent years learning from their own database exactly how little a memo is worth next to a voter. So my advice to clients, the unglamorous one I keep repeating, is build your own database. Build a file of the people who care about your issue in the districts that matter and keep it the way an incumbent keeps theirs. Because if you're going to play in the same arena as the elected official, you don't get to play with weaker tools than they do. You bring the same tool they bring, the one that runs on voters, not on arguments. That's the first piece of the machine, the campaign they're running to keep the seat. The next piece is how they defend their way into it in the first place and how they're defending it right now against a challenger who, remember, may not even have a name yet. So that's a move that Faucheux calls inoculation. Here's a question that sounds like it has an obvious answer, but doesn't. If you know a particular attack is coming, you can see it from a mile off. It's the most predictable hit in the world. When do you deal with it? The instinct is when it lands, wait for the punch, then counter it. Maybe the punch isn't going to come after all. You kind of delude yourself into thinking it's not really a real threat. Faucheux says that's backwards. And the cases he uses to prove it are some of the best in the book, or at least they're some of my favorites because there's some good war stories in here. So let's start with Franklin Roosevelt. And to feel why this is the case Faucheux reaches for first, you have to go back to 1921 before any of the presidency, before the fireside chats. Back when Roosevelt was a 39-year-old who'd just been the vice presidential nominee and looked like the obvious future of his party. That summer, on vacation, he goes for a swim and comes back feeling off. And within days, he cannot stand. It's polio. He loses the use of his legs permanently, and he will spend the rest of his life unable to walk unaided. Now, sit in that moment with him because this is where the mechanism lives. It's the 1920s. There's no language in national politics for a leader who can't walk. The assumption of the age is simple and brutal. A man who can't command his own body can't command a country. Roosevelt has, overnight, acquired the single most disqualifying vulnerability available to a public figure. And everyone around him can see it. His own mother wants him to retire to the family estate and live quietly as an invalid. That was the expected ending. So here's the question he's actually facing and the question at heart of this whole section. You have a glaring weakness. Everyone knows it's there. The attack writes itself. What do you do? The instinct, maybe the amateur's instinct, I'd say, it's not everyone's instinct, is to wait. Stay quiet, manage it when it comes up, have a graceful answer, ready for the day someone raises it. Of course, Roosevelt does the opposite, and he does it for 7 years. 7 years before he runs for anything again. He builds a different story about himself, deliberately out in public, long before he needs it. Not a story that hides the polio, you can't hide it. A story that makes the polio mean something other than weakness. So he spends years at Warm Springs, Georgia, working to rehabilitate himself and turning the place into a center for other polio patients. He keeps up a relentless public correspondence. He stays visibly, audibly in the fight, a man of action, restless, fighting his way back, fighting for the forgotten. And by the time he runs for governor of New York in 1928 and president in 1932, the story is set. It's load-bearing. And watch what it does to the attacks, because this is the part that's pretty magical when you think about it. When opponents say Roosevelt is reckless, moving too fast, too willing to try things, that doesn't wound him. It confirms the man of action story he's spent 7 years building. When the wealthy say this patrician has betrayed his own class, that confirms he's a friend of the common person. The hits don't bounce off. They get absorbed and turned into fuel. The very weakness, a body that betrayed him, has been rebuilt into the source of this strength. Here is a man who suffered, who fought his way back, who therefore understands suffering and won't quit on you. The vulnerability and the defense end up being the same material. So that's the move with inoculation. And the reason it works is entirely about when. He didn't answer the attack when it came. He made the attack impossible to land years before anyone threw it. Faucheux calls this inoculation. You don't wait to catch the disease and then treat it. You introduce a weakened version of it ahead of time so the system builds immunity. By the time the real thing arrives, the body's ready and it barely registers. Roosevelt is the pure case. But we also have a great story in the book about Bill Clinton. So Bill Clinton, 1992, is the same move run by someone who did it on purpose with, I'd argue, a consultant's clarity about exactly what he's doing, and the way he handled it is pretty clinical. So here's a problem Clinton's looking at. He's a Democrat, and by 1992, the Democratic brand had a specific lethal wound. The party has lost 3 straight presidential elections, 1980, 1984, 1988. 3 straight losses, 2 of them landslides. Reagan twice, then Bush. And the autopsy on all 3 losses is the same word: liberal, too far left. Soft on crime, soft on defense, soft on welfare, out of touch with the ordinary voters who used to be the party's base. By 1992, liberal isn't a description in American politics. It's an attack. And it's the attack that has buried 3 Democratic nominees in a row. Clinton knows that if he lets himself get painted with it, he'll be the 4th. So watch what he does and notice the timing, because it begins in advance of and then carries through and during the 1992 campaign. He builds himself deliberately into a different kind of Democrat, and he gives it a name: a new Democrat. He takes over the Democratic Leadership Council, the wing of the party explicitly organized around dragging it back to the center, and he becomes its public face. He backs a middle-class tax cut. He supports the death penalty, and during the campaign itself, famously flies home to Arkansas to oversee an execution, a thing frankly no traditional liberal would do. He talks about welfare reform, about responsibility, about work. He keeps a visible, deliberate distance from the old left of his own party. Every one of those moves is a brick, and he's laying them years before he needs the wall he's building. And by the time the Republicans reach for the only attack that worked for 12 years, he's just another tax and spending liberal. The attack has nowhere to land. Clinton has spent years making himself visibly, concretely, the guy that line doesn't describe. The hit comes and it slides right off because the ground was prepared. So here we have the same mechanism as Roosevelt, run against a different weakness. The other 2 vulnerabilities he handles the same way and faster, right? He's the governor of a small state, Arkansas, with no national profile. So he spends years building one, making himself a national figure long before he runs as one. And of course, he's got a personal conduct problem, the womanizer image. In a year, women voters will decide. So he gets out in front on women's issues and puts a strong, visible marriage at the center of the campaign. 3 weaknesses, 1 move, run on all of them at once. Build the counter story early so that when the predictable attack arrives, it lands on something solid. And then Faucheux gives you the counterexample to all of this. Bob Dole in 1996. Dole's vulnerability is his age. He'd be the oldest person ever elected to a first term, completely predictable, visible for years. And Dole does essentially nothing about it in advance. He doesn't spend the prior years constructing a persona, vigorous, sharp, ahead of his time, that would have blunted it. So when the age issue arrives in the campaign, there's no immunity built up, and it does exactly the damage you'd expect. Same predictable weakness as FDR's, as Clinton's. Opposite preparation, opposite result. So that's the mechanism. The predictable attack gets neutralized in advance, sometimes years in advance, by building the counter story before you need it so that when the hit comes, it lands on something solid instead of something soft. Now, let me bring it over to us, because there are 2 different ways this matters for our work, and they do pull in different directions. The first is about reading the official. Remember, the person across your table is defending their seat right now against a challenger who may not have a name yet. That means they're already inoculating, or at least they should be, and the smart ones are. They know their own vulnerabilities better than you do. They know the line of attack the next opponent is going to run, because in a lot of cases, it's the same one that's been run on them before, and that shapes what they can say yes to. Here's where it gets practical. If your ask happens to touch one of those vulnerabilities, if saying yes to you hands the nameless opponent a clean shot, The official isn't going to do it, no matter how good your argument. But the reverse is the opening. If your ask helps them inoculate, if it gives them a way to shore up a known weakness before the challenger can use it, now you're not a supplicant anymore. You're useful to the campaign. Think about an official with a soft spot on, I don't know, say the environment, who knows it's coming back at them next cycle. The group that walks in with a credible way to firm up that record isn't asking for a favor. They're handing the official a vaccine. Same ask, completely different reception, depending on whether you've read which weaknesses they're already trying to cover. The second way it matters is about us, our own campaigns, our own clients, because inoculation works for an organization exactly the way it works for a candidate. If you're running a public affairs campaign, you usually know the attack that's coming. You know the line the other side is going to use because it's the obvious one. You're big, you're foreign owned, you're in it for the profit, whatever your particular vulnerability is. And the instinct, again, is to keep your head down and have a rebuttal ready for when it comes. The book says, prepare the ground first, build a record, the relationships, the third-party credibility before the fight is live so that when the attack lands, it lands on padding instead of bare skin. The clearest version of this is a company moving into new territory, knowing the dread is coming, a new technology people are nervous about, an industry with a reputation problem. The reactive play is to wait for the incident, then scramble to respond. The inoculation play is to have spent the prior year building the trust and the track record that makes the eventual attack glance off. One of those works. The other is what most organizations actually do, which is wait and then get hit on bare skin. I say all of this recognizing the real limit we face on the other side. A candidate has years and a single name to build a story around. Our campaigns are often shorter than that, and sometimes there's no single face to attach the counter story to. So this isn't lift and shift, but the core of it, name your predictable weakness and build the defense before the attack instead of or after is what transfers well. So that's inoculation. The database was how the official keeps the seat. Inoculation is how they defend it from a punch they can see coming. The last piece is what happens when they stop defending and go on offense, when the official or you sets out to put an opponent in a position with no good way out. Faucheux has a name for that too, and a case that shows exactly how it works. The name is the pincer. So the database is the defense, inoculation is the defense, but a campaign isn't only defense. And the best operators don't just protect their position. They go and put the other side in a box. Faucheux has a whole catalog of these offensive moves with names like the trap, the poison bait, and the machine gun attack. I'm not going to walk you through all of them because most of them are pure electoral mechanics and the returns might drop off fast for us. But there's one worth the time because the logic underneath it is something we use constantly in public affairs, usually without naming it, and he calls it the pincer. The idea comes straight out of military thinking. You maneuver your opponent into a position where every move they make costs them something. No safe exit. Whatever they do, they lose ground. And the cleanest example in the book is a governor's race in Virginia in 1997. So let me set the stage here. It's an open race for governor, and the Democrat, Don Bayer, is the sitting lieutenant governor. He's ahead, well-liked, well-funded, and he's built his campaign around a serious, responsible theme, investing in Virginia's schools. Education, of course, costs money. So the whole logic of his campaign assumes the state will keep the revenue it has. That's the platform he's standing on. But hold on to that because it's about to become the thing that traps him. Okay, so across from him is the Republican, Jim Gilmore, the Attorney General. And Gilmore is behind in the polls. So Gilmore does what a candidate who's behind has to do. He finds one issue and he bets the whole race on it. The issue he picks is the personal property tax on cars, the car tax. In Virginia, at the time, you pay an annual tax on the assessed value of your vehicle, and everybody pays it and everybody hates it. It's the bill that shows up once a year and ruins your week. And Gilmore's pledge is about as simple as a promise in politics you can ever get. It's this: no car tax. 3 words. He's going to abolish it. Now watch the trap close in because it happens in 2 motions. The first motion. Bayer can come out against Gilmore's plan. That's the honest position, given his platform. You can't promise to pour money into schools and also blow a hole in the budget by killing a popular tax. But the second he opposes it, he's the guy standing in front of every car owner in Virginia, telling them they have to keep paying the bill they hate. That's the first jaw. So maybe he goes the other way around and embraces the cut. And here's the second motion, the detail that makes this thing lethal. Don Baer owned car dealerships. He was a car guy. That was his business. So a car dealer campaigning to cut the car tax doesn't look like a man having a principal change of heart. It looks like a man writing himself a check. And on top of that, he's just abandoned his own education theme and validated his opponent's signature issue. So that's the second jaw. Oppose it, you're the villain telling people to keep paying. Embrace it, you're self-serving and you've surrendered your own campaign. Both jaws are closing at once and there's no clean way through the middle. And the middle is exactly where Baer goes. He tries to thread it. He comes out against Gilmore's full repeal, but offers his own version, a smaller, conditional, phased-in tax credit with qualifiers. A responsible, complicated, reasonable answer. And it's the worst possible place he could have landed. He's now opposed to the clean, popular no car tax pledge. And he's proposing a car tax cut of his own anyway, which steps on his education message just as badly as embracing Gilmore's plan would have. He took both jaws. The complicated answer pleased no one. Gilmore rode 3 words from behind all the way to the governor's mansion. The lesson Faucheux pulls out is partly about simplicity. 3 words beat a footnoted counterproposal every time, but the deeper lesson is the pincer itself. Gilmore didn't win by having the better tax policy. He won by structuring the choice so that his opponent lost, no matter which way he turned. The terrain was rigged before Baer ever opened his mouth. So what it means for public affairs practitioners in 2 parts. The first is recognizing when you're the subject of the pincer. An opponent frames a debate so that your position becomes the box. Think about how a fight gets set up as jobs versus the environment or innovation versus red tape. If you let that frame stand, you're Baer. Every move costs you. Defend the regulation and you're against jobs. Drop it and you've abandoned your own people. The framing did the work before the argument ever started. The skill is to see the pincer while it's being built and refuse the terms, not to climb into the box and try to argue your way out of it, which is what Baer did with his complicated little counterproposal. The second way is using it. Gilmore won because he chose an issue where his opponent was structurally trapped, popular with voters, and impossible for the other side to embrace without contradicting themselves. When you're picking the ground for a campaign, that's the quality you're hunting for, not just an issue you're right about, an issue where being right is combined with the other side having no comfortable place to stand. The strongest campaigns aren't fought on the ground where you have the best argument. They're fought on the ground where your opponent has no good answer. That's a harder thing to find than a good argument, and it's a different muscle. Most of us, by training, go looking for the position we can defend best. The pincer says, look instead for the position your opponent cannot defend at all. And if you can find ground where both of those are true at once, that's where you want the fight. So those are the 3 plays. The database, how the official holds a seat. Inoculation, how they defend it from a predictable hit. And the pincer, how they put the other side in a box and how to notice when someone's building one around you. 3 different mechanics, but they're all the same underlying thing. A person who treats every move as part of a contest they intend to win. Now, those are the moves. Underneath the moves are a few ideas portable enough to carry into any fight, electoral or not. And that's where we're headed next, which is the mental models. 3 ideas from this book are portable enough to carry into any fight, as I say, whether there's a ballot involved or not. The first one is the most useful tool in the book, and it's one seasoned campaigners turn to on every campaign. It is one I use all the time. It's one of my go-tos. It is the message box. You draw a square, cut it into 4. The 4 boxes are what you say about yourself, what you say about your opponent, what your opponent says about themselves, and what your opponent says about you. That's it, 4 quadrants. Every contested message in the world lives inside those 4 boxes. What the model captures is that a contest is never one-sided, and it's never just about you. There are always 4 conversations running at once. Your case for yourself, your case against them, their case for themselves, and their case against you. Most people, when they prepare for a fight, they fill in one box, the top left one, what we say about ourselves. They build a brief, they polish the argument for their own position, and they walk in having thought hard about exactly one of the 4 conversations that's about to happen. The official across the table has thought about all 4. They've wargamed what the other side says about them. That's what inoculation is, defending the bottom right box before it gets used. They know their own attack lines and their opponents. They see the whole square. And that's a big part of why the meeting goes the way it does. One side is playing on a 4-square board and the other showed up having only studied 1 square. The thing the message box names is that the 3 boxes you'd rather not look at exist whether you look at them or not. Your opponent's case for themselves is being made right now with or without your attention. Their attack on you is coming, whether or not you thought about it. The box doesn't tell you what to do, it just makes the whole board visible. And most people lose contests they could have won simply because they never looked at 3/4 of it. Okay, that's the first one. The second one is about a specific kind of lie, the kind people tell you to your face. Faucheux's version comes from candidates, and it's brutal. He says, of all the people who walk up to you on the street and tell you they're with you, encourage you, say they're rooting for you, 1/3 will actually vote for you, 1/3 don't care, and some of them don't even live in your district, and the final third are against you. They're being polite. They smiled and lied, and they'll never tell you otherwise. He calls it the 1/3 rule. And the deeper point underneath it is that encouragement is the cheapest thing in politics. It costs nothing to tell someone you support them. It feels good to say, it's awkward to withhold. So people hand it out freely. And it's almost worthless as a signal because it's so rarely connected to anything they'll actually do. Now, every one of us in this work has a version of this problem, and it can distort what we see. The stakeholder who nods through the whole meeting, the official who says warmly that they're very sympathetic to our position, the ally who tells you they're behind you. How much of that is the 1/3 that's real? How much of it is the polite 2/3? Because if you build a campaign or a client update on the warm room rather than the real count, you've built it on the cheapest, least reliable data there is. What the 1/3 rule names is the gap between expressed support and actual support, and the fact that the gap is enormous and almost always invisible. The room will lie to you gently all day long. The model doesn't tell you to distrust everyone. It tells you that warmth and commitment are different things, and that the first is widely overproduced relative to the second, which is exactly why the database matters more than the meeting. The file tracks what people do. The room only tells you how they feel about telling you things. Okay, the third mental model is a very clear definition of strategy that comes from that poker and gumbo weekend we mentioned earlier, the one where Matt Reese was trying to pin down the word strategy. The answer they landed on is this. Strategy is how you position yourself and allocate your resources to maximize your strengths and minimize your weaknesses. It's a concept, a way to win. A tactic, by contrast, is a tool you use to carry the strategy out. Strategy is the thinking, tactics are the doing. Now, my own view on strategy is a bit more detailed than this. I subscribe very much to the principles that we learned in the book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. So if doing a deep dive on strategy interests you, go find that in the feed. But for now, let's come back to our story here. Strip away the language, and a strategy is, at bottom, a decision about where your finite resources go. You have only so much money, so much time, so many people, so much of the candidate or the client's attention. A strategy is a set of choices about where all of that gets spent, and just as much where it doesn't. The frown box gets nothing. The loyal voter who'll show up anyway gets nothing. Strategy is as much about what you starve as what you feed. That's the thing this model names, and it's why so much of what gets called strategy isn't. A list of everything you like to do is not strategy. It's a wish list, and it usually means the hard choice hasn't been made yet. Real strategy shows up as subtraction. You can read someone's actual strategy not from what they say they're prioritizing, but from where the money and the hours are actually going and what they've decided to let go of to free them up. For us, the allocation lens is a quiet test you can run on any campaign, including your own. Where's the money actually going? What are we deliberately not doing? If the honest answer is a bit of everything and we're not really giving anything up, there's no strategy there yet. That's activity. The thing that separates a campaign with a strategy from one without isn't the quality of the ideas. It's whether somebody was willing to concentrate the resources and walk away from the rest. All right. Mental models done. Let's move on to common misunderstandings. 3 ways people could misread this book. Not necessarily ways they misapply them in the field. I think we'll get to application next, but ways they walk away from the text with maybe the wrong idea about what Faucheux is actually saying. So the first misreading, that this is a manual for going negative. This is the big one because the book is full of attack mechanics, the pincer, the traps, the timing of when to hit. A casual reader comes away thinking Faucheux is teaching people how to tear opponents down, that the whole enterprise is a how-to for the nastier side of politics. Read the attack chapter closely, and it's almost the opposite. What Faucheux actually lays out is a set of conditions an attack has to meet before you should ever throw it. The attack has to be believable, and it has to be accurate, provably, documentably accurate. It has to be relevant to the voter's actual decision, not just embarrassing. It has to be fair, and it has to be in the right tone, or it rebounds on you. That's not a license to go negative. That's a long list of hurdles, most of which disqualify the cheap shot you were tempted to take. He's not arguing that attacks are good. He's arguing that if you attack, and in a contest, sometimes you must, there's a discipline to it. And the undisciplined attack hurts the attacker way more than the target. There's a famous illustration of the rule from a Senate debate back in 2000. One candidate, in the middle of an exchange, walks across the stage and right up to his opponent's podium, into her space, brandishing a pledge and demanding she sign it on the spot. He meant it to look like he was strong, and it looked instead like a man crowding out a woman on live television. It broke the tone rule crystal clear and cold, and the room turned on him. And the moment did him real damage. In fact, the woman he crowded out on stage would win. Of course, her name is Hillary Clinton. That's the whole point Faucheux is making. The attack wasn't wrong because attacking is wrong. It was wrong because it was undisciplined. And an undisciplined attack rebounds on the person who throws it. The misreading takes a chapter that's mostly about restraint and remembers it as a chapter about aggression. Okay, the second misreading is that the strategy is the slogan. People read the message chapters, see all the attention paid to phrasing, i.e. no car tax, the memorable line, the soundbite under 9 seconds, and they conclude that the work is wordsmithing. Find the catchy line and you've found your strategy. And I deal with this often with clients who default to first one and land the slogan, the brand identity, the logo, the campaign name, before we've sorted out the strategy, let alone the frame of what this debate is going to unfold in. Anyway, Faucheux is careful to separate these, and the distinction does matter. The message is the strategic core, the central persuasive reason a voter should choose you over the alternative, the thing that sits on the fault line between you and your opponent. The slogan is just the most compressed public expression of that message. The slogan illustrates the message. It isn't the message. You can have a sharp slogan sitting on top of no strategy at all, which is most bad political advertising, a clever line attached to nothing. And you can have a powerful message that never resolves into a bumper sticker. No car tax worked not because it was 3 catchy words. It worked because underneath those 3 words was a complete strategic position that trapped the opponent. The words were the visible tip. The misreading mistakes the tip for the whole thing and sends people off hunting for clever phrases when the work is actually building the position the phrase points at. Okay, the third misreading, that targeting different voters means saying different things to each of them. The targeting chapters talk about dividing the electorate up by geography, by demographics, by issue, and tailoring what you emphasize to each slice. Now, a lot of readers may hear that as, well, tell each group what it wants to hear. Be one thing to seniors, the opposite to young families, and never let them compare notes. That targeting is two-faced. That's not what the book argues, and Faucheux is direct about the line. The distinction he draws is between what voters need to hear and what they want to hear. And good targeting is about emphasis and relevance, not about contradiction. You lead with the part of your record that matters most to the group in front of you. The retiree hears about the part of your platform that touches them. The young parent hears about a different part, but it's the same platform, the same candidate, the same set of actual positions. You're choosing which true thing to foreground, not inventing a new self for each audience. The version where you tell incompatible stories to different rooms isn't sophisticated targeting. It's the thing that ends careers the moment the room compares notes, which in the age of a phone in every pocket is pretty much immediately. The misreading then confuses targeting with deception, when the book is describing targeting as a discipline of relevance built on a consistent core. Okay, Let's move on to modern application. Everything so far has been about seeing the campaign the official is running. This section is what we do with that. So the first one is to build the file, the database, turned into your own tool. This is the application I care most about because it's the one I spend the most time pushing on my clients, and it comes straight out of the chapter we opened the mechanism section with earlier, and that is the incumbent's voter file. Here's a translation. The official runs on a database of the people who decide their future. The lesson for us is not to admire that, is to build one. Most public affairs campaigns I see are organized around the brief, the argument, the polling, the report, and a list of supportive stakeholders, maybe a few logos and a coalition letter. That's backwards. The most valuable asset a public affairs campaign can own is a living file of real people in the districts that matter who care about the issue and can be moved to act. And the failure mode the book predicts is specific. An organization walks into an official's office and says, the public supports us. Here's our polling. The official who has their own file and their own read on their own district has no reason to take that on faith, and every reason, actually, not to, because the group across the table is, of course, going to say the public is on their side. So the claim lands as noise. The same organization that instead shows up, able to say, 400 of your own constituents have written to this office this month. Here they are. Here's where they live. That organization is speaking the only language the official's database speaks. Real people locatable in the district who vote. The thing the book makes clear once you read it from our side is that a stakeholder list and a voter file are not the same object. A stakeholder list is organizations that agree with you. A voter file is individuals who will act, sorted by where they are and how reliable they are. The official has the second. Most of us bring the first and wonder why it doesn't move the room. The whole translation is stop maintaining a list of allies and start building a file of constituents. It's slower, yes. It's less glamorous, absolutely. And it's the closest thing to a real power move available to an organization that can't vote. Okay, number 2 is to inoculate before the fight, not during it. So this one comes straight from the inoculation cases, Roosevelt building the man of action story before he needed it, Clinton firming up the soft spots in his record long before the attacks came. The translation to our work is about timing, and it cuts against the grain of how public affairs sometimes gets resourced. Most campaigns get built when the fight is already live. The regulation is tabled, the opponent is active, the story is already running, and now everyone scrambles. The book's lesson is that the most important work happens before any of that, in the quiet period when there's no fight yet, and therefore no urgency, and usually no budget. Take the clearest modern case, a company moving into territory where the public is already nervous, a new technology people don't trust, an industry carrying a reputation problem into a new market. The predictable attack is completely visible from the start. This is unsafe. This is here to extract, not to serve. This will cost jobs. You know the line that's coming, the way FDR knew the polio question was coming. The reactive play is to wait for the triggering incident and then respond. The inoculation play is to spend the quiet year building the local track record, the community relationships, the third-party credibility, so that when the incident comes, and it will, the attack lands on a year of accumulated trust instead of on bare ground. The failure mode the book predicts is the organization that has a brilliant crisis response ready, sitting there on the shelf, and nothing built underneath it. A rebuttal with no foundation. Faucheux's whole point about Dole is that there was no defense in place when the predictable hit arrived. And so the predictable hit worked. The same is true for an organization that knew exactly what was coming and still chose to wait for it. The inoculation lesson, translated, is that the budget you spend before there's a fight is worth more than the budget you spend once there is one, which is the opposite of how many organizations allocate their resources. Okay, 3, run your problem through the message box, one for every actor in the field. So the third one here is a live drill using the model from the last section. And here's where I push back on a thing people assume about this tool, including the version of me that first read the book. The instinct is that the message box is built for 2 candidates and 1 election day. Your guy, their guy, the contrast between them, and that it falls apart in the diffuse, many-sided world public affairs actually lives in. No single opponent, no deadline, no clean enemy. That instinct is wrong. The message box isn't a map of one fight. It's a thinking exercise, and you run it against any actor whose position you have to understand. Take a real shaped problem. You represent an industry facing a proposed rule that would raise its costs, and you think the rules rests on bad assumptions. There's no single opponent here. There's a regulator, there's an elected official who will wear the decision, a few hostile stakeholder groups, and the press. So you don't draw one message box, you draw several. Draw one against the lead stakeholder group opposing you. Okay, so top left, what you say about yourself. Well, you say this rule costs jobs and won't deliver what it promises. Okay, bottom right, what they say about you. Of course, they oppose a rule that cuts their margins. Now, you can see your weakest flank against that group, and it's exposed. They're not just protecting profits, is clean and believable. And if you'd only built your own argument, you'd never have stared at it in the face. Now, draw a different one against the elected official who has to carry the decision. Their boxes are not stakeholder group boxes. What the official says about themselves isn't, we're protecting the public from a greedy sector. It's something closer to, I'm a responsible steward who listens to all sides. What they say about you is different too and more manageable. Mapping the official's box tells you something the stakeholder box can't, where the official's self-image leaves you room to give them a way to say yes. And draw a third against the media frame because the press is running its own version, the story it finds most tellable, which is usually conflict, usually some shape of industry versus the public. Map that box and you can see the narrative you're going to be slotted into before you open your mouth on this issue. That's 3 boxes for one problem, and a serious campaign would have all of them mapped because each actor is running a different contest and you're in all of them at once. The tool people thought was too candidate-shaped for public affairs turns out to be more valuable here, not less, precisely because our world has more actors than a 2-candidate race does, and each one needs reading. The box doesn't break in a diffuse environment. It multiplies to fit it. The discipline is remembering to draw more than one. Most people map themselves against a single faceless opposition and miss that the official, the regulator, and the press are 3 separate fights with 3 separate boxes. And I'm only using these 3 as example. Your campaign probably is going to have way more than 3 boxes required for you to properly suss out where you land in those different frames. Okay. Let's move on to the mastery lesson. So what does the person who has really absorbed Faucheux's book become? I think the answer in a single word is prepared. That sounds boring as well, right? Do your homework, be ready. It's not what I mean. What I mean is this. The amateur and the professional in this book aren't separated by talent. They're not even separated by experience exactly. They're separated by when the work happens. The amateur does the work during the contest, reacts to the attack when it comes, builds the case when the fight is already live, figures out the message in the room. The professional did the work before the contest started. The file was built years ago. The weakness was inoculated before anyone attacked it. The 4 boxes were mapped before the meeting. By the time the contest is visible to everyone else, the professional's real work is already finished. The contest is just where it shows. It's a way of standing in your work where you assume the fight is already underway, quietly and visibly, and that the time to prepare for it is now, in the lull, when there's no fight and no urgency and no reason anyone would thank you for it. This is another thing I often share with clients is it is too late to start this work when it already feels like you're feeling the pressure. Work on it in the down years. The official understands this in their bones. The day after they win, they start preparing for an election that's years away and an opponent who doesn't exist yet. That's a professional posture. The contest is permanent, so the preparation must be permanent as well. And here's the specific thing I think a lot of us in public affairs miss because our training points often the other way. We're taught to be responsive. The client calls, the issue breaks, the regulation drops, and we mobilize. Fast, smart, hard. We pride ourselves on the quality of the response, but a posture built entirely around responding is structurally the amateur's posture. It does the work during the contest. The professional's edge isn't a better response. It's having done the work so far ahead that the thing everyone else is responding to is something you saw coming and prepared for months ago, years ago. The tools we covered are all really the same instruction read this way. The database isn't a tactic. It's preparation made permanent. The file you build in the quiet years so you're not guessing when it counts. Inoculation is preparation aimed at a punch you can see coming. The message box is preparation against every actor in the field, done before you're in the room with any of them. None of these is something you do when the fight starts. Every one of them is something that only works if it was already done. So the posture is this. Stop thinking of yourself as a person who responds well when the contest comes. Start thinking of yourself as a person whose work is mostly finished before the contest is even visible. That's a harder way to work and way less rewarding in some ways. Nobody claps for the file you built 2 years ago before you needed it. There's often little glory in having properly forecasted these things, but it's the difference the book is actually pointing at. The professional prepares the contest, the amateur shows up to it. Okay, let's close this out. Go back to that campaign office the morning after the election. The pizza boxes, the flat beer, the stale air. Walk past it and the race looks like it's over, right? The person who won is already working the next one. We said it at the top. Winning the next election begins the day after you win the last one. And by now, you can hear how literally they mean it. They operate that way. Every day they hold the seat. So the next time you're across a desk from that person, you'll understand the room. They've been running a campaign since the morning they won, and your meeting is part of it. Their question was never whether your argument is sound. It's whether you've brought them something that helps in the contest they never stopped running. Let's be honest. So many of us bring a memo or a deck, policy briefing to these meetings. The official hasn't spent years learning what a memo is worth or what a deck is worth. What actually moves them is the file of their own voters built in the quiet years before there's a fight when nobody would think to thank you for it. That's the lesson of the book, and it's the part I think we don't spend enough attention to in our line of work. We don't run for office, but we're closer to the people who do than we like to admit, playing the same field with the same tools, whether we've picked them up or not. That is what this book is about. That's why I've got this book in the canon. There's so much more that we can learn from this book. Lots of useful chapters for us to take out of running for office. But I'll call it a wrap there. It's been a long one. If you found this interesting, please, I would appreciate a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts. Tell your colleagues, friends about the show. We are building the community around Masters in Public Affairs, one follower at a time. Okay, with that, we will call this one a wrap.